I never imagined that one day I'd be standing on the doorstep of my own home with police officers behind me, watching my parents' faces drain of color as they realized their plan had backfired. But that's exactly where I found myself at 32 years old, fighting to reclaim the house I had worked for, paid for, and built my life around after my own family tried to steal it from me. My journey taught me that sometimes the most painful betrayals can lead to the most powerful self-discovery, and that standing firm in your own worth is the greatest victory of all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first signs of trouble appeared so subtly that I nearly missed them. It was an unseasonably warm Tuesday in April, and I was putting the final touches on a presentation that could determine the trajectory of my career at Meridian Publishing. As senior editor of their most successful lifestyle imprint, I had spent the last 6 years building a reputation for discovering groundbreaking authors and turning overlooked manuscripts into bestsellers. Now, I was being considered for the executive editor position, a role that would allow me to shape the direction of the entire division. My apartment, a 3-bedroom historic townhouse I had purchased 2 years ago in the Oakwood district, was my sanctuary, filled with carefully curated books, art collected during my travels, and the kind of peaceful silence that nurtures creativity. That morning, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating my workspace as I rehearsed my presentation points one final time before heading to the office. My phone vibrated against the wooden desk, displaying my mother's name. We spoke. Perhaps once a month, our conversations brief and perfunctory, a pattern established long ago when it became clear that my accomplishments would never quite measure up to those of my older sister, Vanessa. "Alexandra," my mother's voice carried an unusual warmth that immediately put me on alert. "How are you, darling?" "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, glancing at my watch. "Just preparing for a big meeting. Is everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful," she said. "Your father and I have been thinking about you. We're worried you're working too hard." The concern was so uncharacteristic that I nearly laughed. Throughout my childhood and early adulthood, my parents had emphasized nothing but achievement and productivity. My father, a corporate attorney, and my mother, a hospital administrator, had always prioritized professional success above all else, and had always made it clear that Vanessa's path as a surgeon represented the pinnacle of that success. "I'm managing," I said cautiously. "What's this about?" "We've made a decision," she continued, ignoring my question. "We're going to come stay with you for a while, just to help out, make sure you're taking care of yourself." I nearly dropped my phone. "Stay with me? Mom, that's not necessary. I'm extremely busy with work and, Alexandra, we're your parents. We want to be there for you, especially after everything you've been through with Daniel." Daniel, my ex-husband whose infidelity had ended our marriage 18 months ago. The divorce had been finalized a year ago, and while the emotional wounds were still healing, I had deliberately kept my parents at a distance during that process, knowing their tendency to critique rather than comfort. That's thoughtful, but I'm doing fine, really. "We've already arranged everything," my mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. "We'll arrive on Friday. Your father is taking a sabbatical, and I've arranged for extended leave. We're looking forward to spending quality time together." My mind raced through potential excuses, but each one felt hollow against my mother's determined tone. "Mom, my house isn't really set up for guests long-term. Maybe we could discuss this later when I'm not about to head into a meeting." "Nonsense. You have that lovely guest room, and we won't be in your way. We'll talk details later. Good luck with your meeting, dear." The call ended before I could formulate a stronger objection. I sat staring at my phone, a sense of foreboding settling over me. In 32 years, my parents had never expressed interest in quality time. Something wasn't right. But with the executive editor presentation looming, I had no choice but to set aside my concerns and focus on the immediate priority. I gathered my materials, took one last glance around my peaceful home, and headed to the office, unaware that this moment of calm would be the last I'd experience for months. The presentation went exceptionally well. The publishing board responded enthusiastically to my vision for expanding the imprint's digital presence while maintaining the curated quality that had built our reputation. By Wednesday afternoon, I received word that I was the frontrunner for the position, with only one more interview scheduled the following week before the final decision. Under normal circumstances, I would have celebrated this professional triumph. Instead, I found myself cleaning out my guest room, rearranging my home office to create more shared space, and mentally preparing for an extended visit from parents, who had always found ways to make me feel inadequate. They arrived Friday evening as promised, their luxury sedan pulling into my driveway precisely at 6. My father, Robert, looked much the same as always. Tall, imposing, his hair now fully silver but his posture unbending. My mother, Eleanor, emerged from the passenger side, designer handbag in hand, her critical gaze already assessing my front garden. "Alexandra?" She embraced me briefly, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering. "The house looks quaint. You've done what you could with it." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, recognizing the familiar backhanded compliment pattern that had colored our relationship for decades. "Let me help with your bags." "I've got them," my father said, retrieving not one or two suitcases from the trunk, but 4 large ones. "Where's the guest room?" I led them inside, giving a brief tour of the townhouse I had lovingly restored, pointing out original architectural details I'd preserved and the modern amenities I'd carefully integrated. My parents nodded politely, offering neither criticism nor appreciation, their expressions unreadable. "The guest room is upstairs. Second door." "On the right," I explained. "Bathroom is adjacent. I've cleared some closet space for you." My father nodded, carrying the luggage upstairs while my mother wandered into my living room, examining the bookshelves and artwork with the detached interest of someone appraising property. "How long do you think you might stay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. My mother turned, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Let's not worry about that now. We're just happy to be here with you." That first evening established a pattern that would dominate the weeks to follow. My parents occupied my space with the confidence of those who believed they had every right to be there, gradually extending their presence from the guest room into every aspect of my home and routine. My mother rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, explaining that her system was more efficient. My father commandeered the comfortable reading chair in the living room, creating what he called his command center with his laptop, files, and legal journals spread across the adjacent side table. I maintained my work schedule, leaving early and often returning late, partly from genuine professional demands and partly to minimize the time spent navigating my transformed home environment. When I did share space with them, conversation centered on Vanessa's latest accomplishments, my mother's advice on home improvements I should consider, or my father's opinions on my career industry, which he clearly considered less prestigious than his own. The arrangement was uncomfortable but manageable, until the third week, when things began to shift in ways I couldn't quite identify but deeply felt. My mother's questions about my work schedule became more pointed. My father expressed concerns about my financial planning, asking detailed questions about my mortgage, investments, and retirement accounts that seemed to cross boundaries of appropriate parental interest. "I'm just trying to help," he insisted when I gently suggested that my finances were well managed and private. "You're on your own now since the divorce, and publishing isn't exactly a lucrative field." "Dad, I appreciate the concern, but I'm doing fine. The house is well within my budget. I have solid savings, and I'm on track for a significant promotion." He nodded without conviction. "Even so, It never hurts to have a second set of eyes. I've helped Vanessa optimize her portfolio, and now she's considering a second property as an investment. The comparison was typical and telling. No matter my achievements, they would never match Vanessa's in my parents' estimation. I changed the subject, retreating to my home office to review manuscripts, the one space they had thus far respected as my territory. By the fourth week, even that boundary began to erode. I returned home one evening to find my mother sitting at my desk, scrolling through my computer. "Mom!" I stopped in the doorway, shocked. "What are you doing on my computer?" She looked up, completely unperturbed. "Oh, Alexandra, don't be dramatic. I was just looking for that recipe website you mentioned. My computer is charging." I stepped forward, noticing that she had multiple windows open, including my email. "You could have asked me. That's my work email, and those manuscripts are confidential." "Honestly, Alexandra," she sighed, standing up. "You act as if I'm some stranger. I'm your mother. Besides, I wasn't snooping. I was actually impressed by some of the correspondence I saw. You're quite professional in your emails." The backhanded compliment did nothing to alleviate my discomfort. That night, I password-protected my computer and began carrying my work laptop to and from the office rather than leaving it at home. As April turned to May, the dynamic in my house grew increasingly strained. My parents showed no signs of planning their departure, evading the question whenever I raised it. They had established routines as if they were permanent residents. My mother had joined the neighborhood garden club, and my father had introduced himself to my neighbors as someone who would be keeping an eye on things around here. Then came the morning I discovered them in my home office, reviewing documents that I immediately recognized as my property records and mortgage papers. "What are you doing with those?" I demanded from the doorway, all pretense of politeness, evaporating. "Those were in my filing cabinet." My father looked up, his expression calm and slightly condescending. "Alexandra, sit down. We need to talk about this house." "What about my house?" "We've been thinking," my mother interjected, "that this place is really too large for just one person. 3 bedrooms for just you? It's excessive." I stared at them, disbelieving. "It's my home. I bought it. I can afford it. The size is my choice." My father leaned forward, assuming his courtroom posture. "The thing is, Alexandra, Vanessa and Tom are expecting their second child. Their apartment is becoming quite cramped. It would make much more sense for them to live here, with the yard for the children and the extra bedrooms." The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications of his statement registered. "You want me to give my house to Vanessa?" "Not give," my mother corrected quickly. "We thought perhaps you could rent it to them at a family rate. You could take their apartment. It's much more suitable for a single person. Or," my father added, "you could move in with us. We have plenty of space, and you'd save significantly on living expenses." The audacity of their proposal left me momentarily speechless. They had invited themselves into my home, assessed its value not to me but to their preferred child, and were now suggesting I surrender it for Vanessa's convenience. "That's not happening," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my house. I have no intention of moving out or renting it to anyone." My parents exchanged a look I recognized from childhood, the one that preceded a united front against my wishes. "Alexandra," my mother said softly, "you've always been so independent, sometimes to your detriment. There's no shame in accepting that families should help each other. Vanessa needs the space more than you do." "My independence isn't a character flaw," I replied, gathering the scattered papers from my desk. "And my house isn't available. This discussion is over." I replaced the documents in my filing cabinet, locked it pointedly, and left for work, my hands shaking slightly as I drove. Something fundamental had shifted, and for the first time, I began to consider how I might reclaim my home from what was starting to feel like an invasion. That evening, I returned to find Vanessa's SUV in my driveway. Inside, my sister and her husband Tom sat at my dining table with my parents, surrounded by takeout containers and talking animatedly. Their 4-year-old son was sprawled on my living room floor with toys I'd never seen before, some kind of washable marker already staining my vintage rug. "Alexandra!" Vanessa looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Surprise! Mom and Dad said we should all have dinner together. We brought Chinese." I set down my bag slowly, assessing the situation. "I wasn't expecting company." "Family isn't company," my mother chided. "Come, sit down. Tom was just telling us about the pediatric wing renovation at the hospital. The children's playroom will be named after your sister." The familiar pattern of elevation and comparison emerged as dinner progressed. Vanessa's accomplishments were celebrated, her opinions sought, while my contributions to the conversation were politely acknowledged and quickly redirected. I observed more than participated, noting the easy way my sister occupied my space, commenting on features she admired or changes she might make if this were my place. After dinner, while I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, I overheard my father speaking to Tom in lowered tones. "It makes perfect sense," he was saying. "Alexandra's always been practical. Once she understands the logic of the arrangement, she'll come around." "We don't want to impose," Tom replied, his voice carrying a hint of reservation. "It's a beautiful home, but it's hers." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sometimes what belongs to one family member benefits everyone more when redistributed, my father said, using his authoritative courtroom voice. "Trust me, I know my daughter. She'll see reason." I stood frozen in my kitchen, dish towel in hand, as the full extent of their plan became clear. This wasn't just about a visit or even about helping me after my divorce. My parents had orchestrated this entire situation with the end goal of transferring my home to Vanessa. When they left that night, I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door, something I'd never done in my own home before. Sleep eluded me as I considered my options. I could assert boundaries more firmly, perhaps give them a move-out deadline. I could stay with a friend temporarily and hope they'd leave in my absence. I could involve a mediator or family therapist to navigate what was becoming an increasingly toxic situation. What I never imagined was that I would soon be standing on my own doorstep with police officers, facing a locked door and the shocked expressions of parents who believed they had the right to take what was mine. But that crossroads was approaching faster than I knew, as family dynamics decades in the eye, making accelerated toward an unavoidable collision. The morning after the uncomfortable family dinner, I woke with newfound clarity and determination. This was my home, purchased with my savings, maintained with my income, and filled with my carefully chosen possessions. I would not be manipulated into surrendering it, regardless of family pressure. I dressed for work with particular care, selecting a tailored navy suit that always bolstered my confidence. In the kitchen, my parents were already establishing their morning routine. My father reading news on his tablet, my mother preparing an elaborate breakfast I wouldn't have time to eat. "We need to talk," I announced, pouring coffee into my travel mug, "about your plans." My mother turned from the stove, spatula in hand. "What plans, dear?" "Your plans to stay here, and apparently your plans for my house." I maintained steady eye contact with my father, who had looked up from his reading. "I overheard your conversation with Tom last night." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise that I'd discovered their intentions, perhaps annoyance at the confrontation, crossed my father's face before his expression settled into the impassive mask I recognized from childhood disagreements. "Alexandra," he began in his measured attorney voice, "you're making assumptions based on fragments of conversation." "Am I?" I placed my mug on the counter with deliberate control. "Then let me be clear about my position. This is my home. I have no intention of moving out, renting it to Vanessa, or redistributing it to benefit the family. I appreciate that you wanted to visit, but I need to know when you plan to return to your own house. My mother abandoned her cooking to stand beside my father, a unified front. We thought we'd stay through the summer at least. You seemed so lonely here by yourself. I'm not lonely, I countered. I have a fulfilling career, good friends, and I value my independence. I've enjoyed having you visit. A diplomatic stretch of the truth. But I need to re-establish my normal routine. My father leaned forward, his tone reasonable yet patronizing. Alexandra, your mother and I are concerned about you. Since the divorce, you've isolated yourself in this oversized house, throwing yourself into work instead of moving forward. We're here to help you transition to a more sustainable lifestyle. By giving my house to Vanessa? The directness of my question surprised even me. My parents exchanged glances before my mother spoke. We're suggesting a practical solution that benefits everyone. Vanessa needs the space for her growing family. You'd be relieved of the burden of maintaining such a large property. It makes sense. It makes sense to you, I clarified, checking my watch. But this isn't a family decision. It's my house, my choice. I gathered my work bag and car keys. I have an important meeting this morning, but tonight, I'd like us to discuss a timeline for you to return to your home. As I headed for the door, my father's voice stopped me. This isn't like you, Alexandra. You've always been the practical one, the team player. I'm disappointed to see this sudden selfishness. The familiar sting of his disapproval threatened to unbalance me, but I straightened my shoulders. Establishing healthy boundaries isn't selfish, Dad. It's necessary. With that, I left for work, the weight of impending confrontation following me like a shadow. The day proved challenging to focus on manuscripts and marketing plans while anticipating the evening's discussion. My assistant noticed my distraction during the afternoon editorial meeting. Everything okay? Mira asked as we walked back to our offices. You seemed somewhere else when Davis was pitching the social media campaign. Family stuff, I admitted. Nothing I can't handle. Family has a unique talent for pushing our buttons, she observed, with the wisdom of someone who navigated her own complex family dynamics. Remember, you're the Alexandra Richards who turned 3 rejected manuscripts into bestsellers last year. Whatever it is, you've got this. Her confidence in me served as a reminder of the professional respect I'd earned, a stark contrast to the diminishment I routinely experienced with my parents. I threw myself into work for the remaining hours, finalizing selection for our fall, catalog and preparing for my final interview for the executive editor position scheduled for the following week. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. My parents were cordial but reserved, their usual critiques and Vanessa-centered conversations replaced with polite inquiries about my day. After dinner, I initiated the discussion I'd promised. I've given this careful thought, I began as we sat in the living room. I value our relationship, but I need to re-establish my space. I'd like to plan for you to return to your home by the end of next week. The reasonable timeline, giving them 10 days to prepare, seemed like a fair compromise. Their response, however, made it clear that compromise wasn't their intention. That won't be possible, my father stated flatly. We've committed to stay here through the summer, and we've made arrangements accordingly. What arrangements? I asked, confused. My mother smiled thinly. The contractor begins work on our master bathroom renovation Monday. The entire upstairs of our house will be uninhabitable for at least 8 weeks. The convenient timing of this previously unmentioned renovation was suspect at best. You planned construction that would make your home uninhabitable without confirming you could stay here that long? We didn't think it would be an issue, my mother replied. You've always been accommodating, Alexandra. This sudden urgency to have your space back seems Unusual. Their dismissal of my boundaries as unusual rather than valid was infuriating, but I maintained my composure. I understand that creates a complication. Perhaps you could stay with Vanessa or look into short-term rentals? My father scoffed. Vanessa's place is already cramped. That's part of the issue we're trying to address. And rental prices for something comparable to this would be exorbitant for temporary accommodation. I'm sorry about the timing, I said, meaning it despite my suspicions. But I need clarity on when my home will be my own again. My mother's expression hardened slightly. We've raised you better than this, Alexandra. Family supports each other. Your sister would never refuse if the situation were reversed. The familiar comparison stung as intended. For a moment, I felt like the difficult daughter again, the one who didn't quite measure up to her sister's generosity, achievements, or compliance with parental expectations. The momentary doubt was quickly replaced with a flash of clarity. This emotional leverage had been used throughout my life to secure my acquiescence. I'm not refusing to support family, I stated calmly. I'm establishing reasonable boundaries about my personal space. If you need financial assistance to secure alternative accommodation during your renovation, I'm happy to help. My offer, sincere, but not the capitulation they sought, was met with chilly silence. Finally, my father spoke. We'll discuss this further when you're in a more reasonable frame of mind, he said dismissively. I suspect the pressure of work is affecting your judgment. The conversation ended there, unresolved and tense. Over the following days, my parents employed various strategies to undermine my position, from mentioning how impressed their friends were with my generosity in hosting them long-term, to strategic phone calls with Vanessa that I could overhear, discussing her children's need for a backyard and how perfect my house would be for them. The situation deteriorated further when I returned from work to find Vanessa and her family once again in my home, this time measuring spaces and discussing furniture placement. Just getting some ideas, my sister explained breezily when she noticed my stunned expression. Mom and Dad mentioned you were considering our proposal. There is no proposal to consider, I clarified firmly. I'm not moving and this house is not available. Vanessa's expression shifted from surprise to hurt. Alex, don't be difficult. You know this makes sense for everyone. You're just one person. We're a growing family. My decision isn't about your family needs, Vanessa. It's about the fact that this is my home, purchased with my money, and I have no intention of leaving it. My brother-in-law Tom had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Vanessa's face hardened in a way that reminded me strikingly of our mother. You've always been selfish, she said quietly. Some things never change. After they left, I confronted my parents about encouraging Vanessa's expectations. My father remained unmoved. You're being unreasonable, he stated. We're trying to find a family solution that benefits everyone. Except me, I pointed out. How exactly does losing my home benefit me? You'd be relieved of this financial burden, my mother said. And you'd be helping your sister. My home isn't a burden, I countered. It's where I've rebuilt my life after my divorce. It represents my independence and stability. Independence, my father repeated with a slight edge. Always your priority, isn't it? Even at the expense of family harmony. That night, I called my closest friend, Diane, seeking perspective from someone outside the situation. They're gaslighting you, she said bluntly after hearing the details, making you question whether your completely normal boundaries are somehow selfish or unreasonable. It's working, I admitted. Part of me wonders if I am being difficult by not helping Vanessa. Alex, listen to yourself. They invited themselves to stay indefinitely in your home, and now they're trying to pressure you into giving it up entirely for your sister. That's not normal family support, that's manipulation. Her clarity helped restore my perspective. The following day, I consulted with Marcus Chen, an attorney colleague who specialized in property law. Based on what you've described, Marcus said after our confidential consultation, I'm concerned this could evolve into a formal dispute over residency. If your parents establish themselves as long-term occupants, it could potentially complicate things should you need legal recourse to reclaim sole access to your property. You're saying they could claim tenant rights? I asked, alarmed. It's unlikely given your clear ownership, but not impossible if their stay extends beyond certain timeframes. My advice is to document everything. Communications about your expectations for their departure, evidence of your sole ownership and financial responsibility for the property, and any concerning behavior or statements regarding their intentions. Armed with this professional guidance, I decided to formally communicate my boundaries in writing. That evening, I presented my parents with a letter stating my expectation that they would vacate my home within 2 weeks, offering financial assistance for temporary accommodation if needed, and clearly stating that I would not under any circumstances be transferring, renting, or vacating my property. Their reaction was immediate and severe. "This is how you treat family?" My mother's voice trembled with what appeared to be genuine hurt. "With formal notices like we're unwanted tenants?" "You left me little choice," I explained. "My verbal requests have been dismissed." "I never thought my own daughter would treat us this way," my father said, his disappointment palpable. "After everything we've done for you." "I'm not treating you poorly by expecting you to respect my home and my boundaries," I insisted, though their reaction made me question myself again. The following days brought increasing tension. My parents began discussing my mental state in concerned tones when they thought I couldn't hear, suggesting that my irrational attachment to my house indicated lingering trauma from my divorce. They invited Vanessa over regularly, creating scenarios where she and her family occupied the main living spaces while I retreated to my bedroom or home office, increasingly feeling like a guest in my own home. The situation reached a breaking point when I discovered they had been showing the house to extended family members, presenting the property as if Vanessa's move was already decided. "Cousin Rebecca was just curious about the historical features," my mother explained when I confronted her. "You're overreacting." "Rebecca mentioned how excited she is that Vanessa will be moving here next month," I countered. "You told her that was happening." "It's the sensible solution, Alexandra. Eventually, you'll see that." That night, I contacted Marcus again, updating him on the escalating situation. His advice was direct. Document everything, change your locks if necessary, and be prepared for potential conflict. Based on what you've described, I'm concerned they're establishing a narrative about your mental state that could be problematic. The lock-changing advice resonated, but seemed extreme. Instead, I focused on my upcoming executive editor interview, channeling my frustration into meticulous preparation. The interview went exceptionally well, and by Friday afternoon, I received the call I'd been hoping for. The position was mine, with a substantial salary increase, expanded creative control, and a team of editors reporting to me. Under normal circumstances, this achievement would have been cause for celebration. Instead, I steeled myself for sharing the news with my parents, knowing they would find ways to diminish its significance compared to Vanessa's accomplishments. I arrived home to find my parents and Vanessa in my living room, gathered around, the coffee table covered with papers. They quickly gathered the documents when I entered, but not before I recognized real estate forms among them. "Congratulations are in order," I announced, deciding to lead with my news. "I've been promoted to executive editor." "That's nice, dear," my mother said with the practiced politeness she reserved for achievements she considered minor. "We have some family business to discuss." "What family business?" My father cleared his throat. "We've been considering the best approach to this situation, and we believe we've found a solution that addresses everyone's needs." "What situation?" I asked, though I already suspected. Vanessa spoke up. "The house, Alex. Mom and Dad have offered to help us purchase it from you at market value. You'd make a profit, we'd get the space we need, and everyone wins. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. The house isn't for sale. Alexandra, my father used his reasoning tone, this is a genuine offer. You'd receive fair compensation, and you could find a more appropriate place for your situation. My situation is that I own this house and I want to continue living in it, I stated firmly. No amount of money would change that. We thought you might say that, my father continued, which is why we've prepared an alternative proposal. He slid a document across the coffee table. This outlines a co-ownership arrangement. Your mother and I would purchase a 50% interest, giving us equal say in the property's use and disposition. The audacity was breathtaking. Absolutely not. Vanessa sighed dramatically. See? I told you she'd be difficult. She always has to make everything a power struggle. This isn't about power, I countered. It's about respecting that this is my home, legally and emotionally. I've built my life here, and I have no intention of selling or sharing ownership. My mother reached for my hand, which I instinctively withdrew. Alexandra, we're worried about you. This irrational attachment to the house, this resistance to family needs, it's not healthy. We wonder if the divorce affected you more deeply than you've acknowledged. The attempt to pathologize my normal boundaries infuriated me. My mental health is excellent, as evidenced by my continued professional success. What's not healthy is this family dynamic where my needs and boundaries are consistently dismissed as irrational or selfish. My father's expression hardened. You've changed, Alexandra. This stubbornness, this unwillingness to consider family priorities, this isn't how we raised you. Perhaps I have changed, I acknowledged. I've grown more confident in my right to make my own choices without seeking family approval. The conversation deteriorated further, with my parents and Vanessa presenting a united front against my unreasonable position. Eventually, I excused myself, retreating to my bedroom with the lock engaged. The weekend brought no resolution. My parents maintained a chilly politeness, while continuing to host Vanessa and her family for extended visits that left me feeling like an unwelcome intrusion in my own home. I spent most of my time either in my locked bedroom or away from the house entirely, seeking refuge in coffee shops and the public library. Monday morning arrived with a new development. I woke earlier than usual, hoping to leave for work before the inevitable kitchen confrontation with my parents. As I gathered my things, I noticed my house keys missing from their usual spot on my bedside table. Assuming I'd absent-mindedly left them elsewhere, I searched my handbag, desk, and bathroom counter without success. When I emerged from my bedroom, my father was seated at the dining table, my keyring placed conspicuously before him. "Looking for these?" he asked mildly. "Yes," I extended my hand. "I need to leave for work." He made no move to return them. "We need to discuss some concerns first, Alexandra." "I'll be late," I protested. "Whatever it is can wait until this evening." "Your mother and I are deeply worried about your emotional state," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "This obsession with control over the house, your increasing isolation from family, these are concerning patterns." A chill ran through me as I recognized the narrative being constructed. I'm not obsessed or isolated. I'm establishing normal, adult boundaries that you're refusing to respect. May I have my keys, please? "We think you need some time to reflect," he said. "I've called your office to let them know you're taking a personal day." The violation of that boundary, contacting my workplace without my knowledge or consent, shocked me. "You did what?" "I spoke with someone named Mira," he continued. "Explained that you've been under tremendous strain lately and need a mental health day. She seemed quite understanding." Fury and disbelief warred within me. You had absolutely no right to do that. We're your parents, my mother said, entering. From the kitchen. We have not only the right but the responsibility to intervene when we see you struggling. The only thing I'm struggling with is your continued disrespect for my autonomy, I snapped, reaching for my keys. I am leaving for work now. My father closed his hand around the key ring. Sit down, Alexandra. This family discussion is long. Overdue. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what was happening, how the dynamic established throughout my childhood continued to play out in my adult life, with my needs and boundaries systematically dismissed in favor of what my parents deemed appropriate. But now, they had crossed a line that could not be walked back. I'll find another way to work, I stated, heading for the door. And when I return this evening, I expect my keys to be returned and a plan for your departure in place. My father's voice followed me. This behavior only confirms our concerns, Alexandra. If you leave now, you'll only demonstrate that you're not thinking rationally. I closed the front door behind me, pulled out my phone, and called the one person I knew would understand exactly what I needed to do next. Marcus, I said when he answered, I need your legal advice immediately. The situation has escalated. Marcus Chen's law office occupied the 10th floor of a sleek downtown building, its minimalist decor and floor-to-ceiling windows projecting the calm competence I desperately needed. I sat across from him at a glass conference table, my hands cradling a cup of herbal tea he'd offered upon noticing my agitation. Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, Marcus said, reviewing the notes he'd taken during my detailed account. Your parents have taken your house keys without permission, contacted your workplace to say you're taking leave without your consent, and have been attempting to pressure you into either selling your home to your sister or entering a co-ownership arrangement with them. Yes, I confirmed. And they've been implying that my refusal indicates some kind of mental instability related to my divorce. Marcus's expression remained professionally neutral, but I detected a flicker of concern. Have they made any specific statements about your mental health to others besides your workplace? They've discussed their concerns in front of extended family, and I overheard them on the phone with my sister suggesting I might need professional intervention if I continue to be irrationally attached to my house. He made another note. And to be absolutely clear, you purchased this property independently. Your name is the only one on the deed and mortgage, and you've never given them any reason to believe they had ownership rights or permanent residency? Correct. I invited them to visit temporarily. There was never any discussion of co-ownership or them staying permanently until recently. Marcus set down his pen and met my gaze directly. Alexandra, based on what you've described, you're dealing with a concerning situation that goes beyond typical family disagreement. Taking your keys, contacting your employer without consent, and attempting to create a narrative about your mental stability, these are control tactics that could potentially escalate. The clinical assessment of my family situation hurt, even as it validated my concerns. What are my options? First, we need to secure your property and establish clear boundaries. I recommend changing the locks immediately. You have every legal right to do so as the sole owner. That feels so extreme, I said, voicing the hesitation that had been holding me back. Consider it a necessary security measure, not a hostile action, Marcus advised. Your parents have already demonstrated they're willing to take your keys without permission. Changing the locks ensures you maintain control of access to your own home. He outlined additional recommendations, documenting all interactions, securing important personal documents and valuables, and possibly obtaining a formal notice of termination of tenancy that would establish a legal record of my expectation that they vacate the property. Would I need police involvement? I asked, the thought making my stomach clench. Not necessarily at this stage, Marcus replied. However, you should be prepared for that possibility if the situation escalates. Your parents have shown they don't respect verbal boundaries. They may similarly disregard written ones. I left his office with a clear action plan and a referral to a locksmith who could come that afternoon while my parents would likely be out on their daily routine. The locksmith, a middle-aged woman named Denise, showed remarkable efficiency and discretion, replacing both the front and back door locks within an hour. "New keys, new start," she said, handing me the set. "I've been doing this 20 years, and sometimes a lock change is the first step to taking back control." Her matter-of-fact support steadied me. I thanked her, paid for the service, and prepared myself for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. I didn't have to wait long. At 4:30, my parents returned from their afternoon activities. I watched from the living room window. As they approached the front door, my father inserting the now useless key into the lock repeatedly before ringing the doorbell. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door but remained standing in the threshold, blocking entry. "The key doesn't work," my father stated, confusion giving way to suspicion as he noticed my positioning in the doorway. "I had the locks changed," I confirmed, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to talk." My mother's expression shifted, from surprise to indignation. "You changed the locks on us? Your own parents?" "After you took my keys without permission this morning, yes. That crossed a line." My father drew himself up to his full height, using the physical intimidation technique that had worked throughout my childhood. "This is outrageous, Alexandra. Let us in immediately." "I will, after we establish some ground rules." I held my position. "I've prepared a formal written agreement outlining the temporary nature of your stay and establishing a firm move-out date of 2 weeks from today. Once you've signed it, you're welcome to continue staying until that date." "This is how you treat family?" My mother's voice rose. "With legal documents and changed locks?" "This is how I respond when my boundaries are repeatedly violated," I corrected. "You took my keys, called my workplace without permission, and have been actively trying to pressure me out of my own home. These actions have consequences." My father's expression darkened. "We've been trying to help you, Alexandra. Your behavior only confirms our concerns about your emotional state." "My behavior is that of a property owner protecting her legal rights," I stated, drawing confidence from Marcus's earlier validation. "You have 2 options. Sign the agreement and stay for the remaining 2 weeks under clear terms, or make other arrangements immediately." "We're not signing anything," my father declared. "This is absurd. Open the door and let us gather our things." I stepped aside, allowing them entry. "I'll give you privacy to pack. The agreement will be on the dining table if you reconsider." As they moved past me, the shock on their faces was evident. This assertiveness was unfamiliar territory in our relationship dynamic, where I had historically been the accommodating daughter who eventually yielded to their pressure. While they packed, I remained in the living room, braced for further confrontation. When they emerged from the guest room with their essential items, my mother's eyes were red-rimmed. "I never thought my own daughter would treat us like criminals," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Changing locks, legal documents, as if we're strangers instead of family." The guilt her tears were designed to evoke flickered briefly before I reminded myself of their actions. "I'm responding to the boundaries you've crossed, Mom. Taking my keys, interfering with my job, trying to pressure me out of my home. These aren't the actions of parents who respect their adult daughter. We'll be staying with Vanessa," my father announced stiffly. "We'll return for the rest of our belongings tomorrow. I suggest you use this time to reflect on your priorities and values, Alexandra. Family should come first." "I agree that family is important," I replied. "But healthy family relationships require mutual respect, something that's been notably absent in how you've approached this situation." After they left, I moved through the house, securing windows and checking that all external doors were locked. The emptiness felt not lonely, but peaceful, my space reclaimed, at least temporarily. I knew this wasn't the end of the conflict, but it represented a significant shift in how I was engaging with it. The following morning, I took a personal date, legitimately this time, to address the situation with my workplace and secure my property further. My first call was to Mira, explaining what had happened and clarifying that any communication about my work schedule should come directly from me, regardless of who might claim to be acting on my behalf. Your father was very convincing, Mira acknowledged. He sounded genuinely concerned, but I should have checked with you directly. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, I assured her. They've had decades to perfect their approach. My next task was more difficult, securing my home. During the upcoming workday, when my parents would return for their remaining belongings, Marcus had advised having a neutral third party present, so I arranged for his paralegal, Jordan, to be at the house during the designated time. I'll ensure they take only their own possessions, Jordan assured me when he arrived, and I'll document everything as we discussed. My parents arrived precisely at the agreed time, their expressions tightening when they saw Jordan waiting with me. A witness? My father's tone was acidic. You think we'd steal from our own daughter? Mr. Jordan is here to assist with the inventory we agreed upon, I replied calmly, referring to the email exchange that had established the terms of their return. Since there's been confusion about boundaries recently, I thought clarity would benefit everyone. The process was tense but proceeded without major incident. Jordan's presence served as both deterrent and witness, his professional demeanor helping to keep the interaction focused on the practical task rather than emotional manipulation. As they prepared to leave with the last of their belongings, my mother made one final attempt. Alexandra, please reconsider this approach. We're your parents. We only want what's best for you. I know you believe that, I acknowledged. But what's best for me is having my boundaries respected, which hasn't been happening. This isn't over, my father stated as they departed. You may own this house, but family obligations transcend property rights. After they left, Jordan helped me document the condition of the house and confirm that only their personal items had been removed. For what it's worth, he said as he prepared to leave, you handled that with remarkable composure. Family conflicts are often the most challenging legal situations precisely because they're so emotionally charged. His validation helped strengthen my resolve for what I suspected would come next. I was right to be prepared. The following evening, I returned home from work to find Vanessa's car in my driveway and my sister waiting on my front porch. We need to talk, she announced as I approached. I assume Mom and Dad are staying with you now? I asked, unlocking my door. Yes, and they're devastated, Alex. I've never seen them like this. She followed me inside without invitation. What were you thinking, changing the locks on them? I set down my work bag and turned to face her. I was thinking that they took my keys without permission, contacted my workplace without consent, and have been trying to pressure me out of my own home. The lock change was a necessary boundary. Vanessa's expression reflected genuine confusion. They're our parents. They were trying to help you. Help me by suggesting I should give up my home to you? By implying I'm mentally unstable because I won't? That's not help, Vanessa. You're twisting everything, she insisted. They see you struggling alone in this big house since Daniel left, throwing yourself into work instead of moving forward. They're worried about you. The familiar narrative, that my independence was somehow problematic, that my focus on career indicated emotional damage rather than genuine ambition, ignited a spark of anger. I'm not struggling, I stated firmly. I'm thriving. I just received a major promotion, I love my home, and I have meaningful friendships and interests. The only problem is that I won't conform to this family's expectation that I should sacrifice my needs for everyone else's. Vanessa's expression hardened. That's so selfish, Alex. You know we need more space for the kids. This house is perfect. For a family, and you're just one person. My house isn't available, Vanessa. Not for sale, not for rent, not for trading. I understand you want more space, but that's something you and Tom need to address without involving my property. Mom and Dad were willing to help us financially to buy it from you, she pressed. You'd get market value. It's a fair offer. It's not about the money, I explained, exasperation creeping into my voice. This is my home. I rebuilt my life here after the divorce. It has meaning and value to me beyond its market price. Vanessa shook her head, her expression a mixture of disappointment and judgment that eerily mirrored our mother's. I don't understand you anymore, Alex. Family has always come first. But now that we actually need your help, you've become this different person. The assessment struck close to home. I had changed, grown more assertive, more confident in my right to determine my own path rather than constantly yielding to family expectations. This evolution, while necessary for my well-being, had disrupted the established family dynamic, where my role was to accommodate others' needs at the expense of my own. I haven't become a different person, I clarified. I've become a more complete version of myself, one who values her own needs alongside others rather than beneath them. Vanessa stood to leave, disappointment evident in every movement. Mom and Dad are right. You've changed and not for the better. Don't be surprised if they take additional steps. They're genuinely worried about you. Her parting words sent a chill through me. What does that mean? What additional steps? They're consulting with Dr. Winters, she said, referencing the family physician who had treated us since childhood. They're exploring options for intervention given your increasingly erratic behavior. The implication was clear and alarming. They were attempting to build a case that my refusal to comply with family pressure indicated mental instability, requiring intervention. It was a manipulative escalation that confirmed my worst fears about their intentions. After Vanessa left, I immediately called Marcus to update him on this concerning development. Document everything, he advised after listening to my account. That conversation with your sister is particularly important. Write down as much as you can remember verbatim, especially the part about intervention. If they're attempting to build a false narrative about your mental state to gain control of your affairs, we need to establish a clear counter-record. The following days brought an uneasy calm. My parents made no direct contact, though Vanessa called several times, each conversation circling back to their concerns and the perfect solution of my selling the house to her family. I maintained firm boundaries while documenting every interaction as Marcus had advised. Then came the certified letter from Dr. Winters, requesting that I schedule an appointment to address concerns raised by family members regarding recent behavioral changes. The official medical letterhead and formal language were clearly designed to intimidate, suggesting professional validation of my parents' narrative. I forwarded a copy to Marcus immediately. This crosses a significant line, he confirmed during our emergency phone consultation. They're attempting to use medical authority to pressure you. Dr. Winters may not be aware of the full context, but his involvement represents an escalation we need to address directly. With Marcus's guidance, I drafted a formal response to Dr. Winters, explaining that I was aware of my parents' efforts to create a false narrative about my mental health as part of a property dispute, that I was currently under the care of my own physician, who had no concerns about my psychological well-being, and that any further communication regarding my health should be directed to my attorney. I also took Marcus's advice to proactively address the situation with my own doctor, Dr. Amara Shah, who had been my primary care physician since I moved to the area. During a scheduled appointment, I explained the situation fully. This is deeply concerning, Dr. Shah said after listening carefully. Using mental health allegations as leverage in a property dispute is not only inappropriate, but potentially harmful. Would you like me to document my assessment of your current psychological well-being? Yes, please, I said, grateful for her understanding. She created a formal letter stating that she had found no evidence of psychological distress beyond normal life stressors, that I displayed clear decision-making capacity, and that in her professional opinion, my refusal to sell my home represented a reasonable boundary rather than evidence of mental instability. Armed with this documentation, I felt more prepared for whatever might come next. I needn't have waited long. 3 days later, I arrived home to find my parents' car in the driveway, alongside an unfamiliar vehicle. Through the front window, I could see my parents seated in my living room with an older man in a suit I didn't recognize. I called Marcus before approaching the house. "They're in my home," I said when he answered. "I don't know how they got in. I changed the locks. Do not enter alone," he advised immediately. "This could be an attempt to create a confrontation they can use against you. I'm calling the police to meet you there. Stay in your car until they arrive." The 20 minutes it took for the police to respond were among the longest of my life. I watched through my car windshield as occasional movement was visible through my living room windows, my parents and their unknown companion apparently making themselves comfortable in my home. When the police cruiser pulled up behind me, I experienced a momentary doubt. Was I overreacting? Would involving law enforcement irreparably damage my family relationships? Then I remembered the escalating pattern of boundary violations and steeled my resolve. 2 officers approached my car, a middle-aged male sergeant named Davis and a younger female officer named Rodriguez. I explained the situation concisely. My house had been entered without permission by family members who had no legal right to be there, following weeks of escalating attempts to pressure me regarding my property. "You're the legal owner?" Sergeant Davis confirmed. "Yes, sole owner. I have identification and property documentation in my bag." After reviewing my driver's license and property deed, the officers accompanied me to the front door. I tried my key, confirming my suspicion that the locks had been changed again. "They've changed my locks," I told the officers, a wave of indignation replacing my earlier uncertainty. Officer Rodriguez knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, the unknown man in the suit opened it, his expression shifting from confidence to concern when he saw the police officers flanking me. "Good evening," Sergeant Davis said professionally. "We've received a report of unauthorized entry to this residence. May I ask your name and relationship to this property?" "Walter Simmons," the man replied, his tone cautious. "I'm a family friend assisting Robert and Eleanor Richards with a concerning situation involving their daughter." My parents appeared behind him, their expressions registering shock at the police presence. "Alexandra," my father began, recovering quickly. "There's no need for this. We're here out of concern for your well-being." "By breaking into my home," I challenged, maintaining my composure. "By changing the locks without permission?" "Officers," my mother interjected, her voice taking on the concerned tone I recognized from childhood illnesses and disappointments. "We're worried about our daughter's mental state. She's been making increasingly erratic decisions since her divorce, and we're here for a family intervention with Dr. Simmons, who specializes in psychological crisis management." The attempted narrative was so transparent, it might have been laughable if it weren't so alarming. They had brought someone, presenting himself as a mental health professional to add credibility to their claims of my supposed instability. "Ms. Richards has provided documentation of sole ownership of this property," Officer Rodriguez stated firmly. "Unless you have legal documentation showing right of access or residency, you are currently trespassing." "This is a family matter," my father insisted, his attorney voice emerging. "We're acting in our daughter's best interest given concerns about her psychological state." "Sir," Sergeant Davis replied, "family concern doesn't override property rights. Ms. Richards has requested you leave her home immediately. Will you comply voluntarily, or do we need to take further action?" The moment stretched taut with tension. My father's face had drained of color, his expression shifting between disbelief and fury as he realized his authority was not being automatically recognized. My mother's hand pressed against her chest in a gesture of distress that had effectively garnered sympathy throughout my childhood. Perhaps we should step outside to discuss this further, Dr. Simmons suggested, clearly recognizing the precarious legal position they occupied. As they reluctantly exited my house, I noticed the telling signs of their intentions inside. Papers spread on my coffee table, what appeared to be luggage in the hallway, family photos they had placed on my mantel, replacing my own. They had been preparing to reestablish their presence, likely with Dr. Simmons's professional validation of their concerns about my mental state as justification. On the front lawn, the confrontation continued as my parents attempted to convince the officers of their legitimate concerns while I stood firm in my property rights. When Dr. Simmons produced a business card indicating he was a family counselor, rather than a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist, Officer Rodriguez raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Sir, are you authorized to make mental health determinations or recommend interventions under state law?" His hesitation was answer enough. "I provide family counseling and crisis mediation services. The Richards contacted me about their concerns." "Without my knowledge or consent," I interjected. "And they gained access to my home by changing the locks without permission after I had previously asked them to leave." The officer's assessment of the situation was clear. My parents and their counselor were directed to leave immediately, with a warning that further attempts to enter my property without permission could result in criminal trespass charges. As they prepared to depart, the look my parents gave me contained a mixture of shock, anger, and something I hadn't expected: fear. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had established a boundary they could not cross, backed by legal authority they could not overrule. "We only wanted to help you," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. "If you truly want to help me," I replied steadily, "you'll respect my decisions and my property rights. That's what supporting an adult daughter actually looks like." After they left, Officer Rodriguez supervised while a locksmith restored my access to my own home. The officers documented the incident thoroughly, providing me with a case number and contact information should further issues arise. "Family situations can be the most complicated," Sergeant Davis observed as they prepared to leave. "You handled this one with remarkable composure." That night, alone in my reclaimed space, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions: relief at having successfully defended my boundaries, sadness at the broken trust with my parents, and a growing sense of confidence in my ability to stand firm in my own truth despite powerful pressure to yield. The confrontation represented more than just a property dispute. It marked my definitive transition from compliant daughter to self-assured woman capable of defining and defending her own boundaries. The house had become a symbol of this transformation, not just a physical structure but the embodiment of my right to determine my own path. The journey ahead would undoubtedly include further challenges in redefining my family relationships, but standing on my own threshold that evening, I felt a profound sense of having reclaimed not just my home, but myself. The morning after the sigh, police intervention, I woke to an unusual sensation: complete ownership of my space. For the first time in weeks, I moved through my home without calculating potential confrontations or strategizing how to navigate around unwelcome occupants. This freedom, however, came with sobering awareness that the conflict with my family had entered a new phase, one that would require continued vigilance and strength. My phone displayed multiple missed calls and messages from my parents, Vanessa, and various extended family members. I set it aside, choosing instead to prepare for the day with deliberate calm, savoring the simple pleasure of an unrushed breakfast in my own kitchen without interruption or judgment. Before leaving for work, I contacted a security company, Marcus, had recommended and scheduled an appointment to install a modern system with cameras, motion sensors, and remote monitoring capabilities. The investment was significant but necessary given recent events. At Meridian Publishing, My new role as executive editor was rapidly filling my days with meetings, manuscript reviews, and strategic planning. My assistant, Mira, had rearranged my schedule to accommodate the previous day's emergency, seamlessly shifting appointments without requiring explanations. "Everything okay?" she asked discreetly when I arrived at the office. "Getting there," I replied, grateful for her concern. Without intrusion, "Thanks for handling yesterday's chaos." "That's what I'm here for," she said with a smile. "Also, congratulations on the Harper manuscript acquisition. Legal just confirmed we've secured the rights." The professional victory, securing a highly anticipated memoir from a reclusive environmental activist, provided welcome focus away from personal turmoil. I immersed myself in work, finding stability in the structured environment where my judgment was respected and my authority clear. During lunch, I finally reviewed my messages, starting with those from Marcus. His voicemail provided practical next steps. "Alexandra, I've drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressing your parents' repeated unauthorized entry and attempts to undermine your autonomy. We should also discuss a potential restraining order given the escalating nature of their actions. Please call when you can." The suggestion of a restraining order against my own parents felt simultaneously extreme and necessary. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. These were the people who had raised me, taught me values and principles, yet were now acting in ways that violated basic respect for boundaries and autonomy. Messages from my family painted a predictably different picture of recent events. My mother's texts portrayed heartbroken parents who only wanted to help their troubled daughter. My father's voicemail was more direct. "Alexandra, your behavior yesterday was completely unacceptable. Involving police in a family matter shows just how far your judgment has deteriorated. We need to discuss next steps for getting you the help you clearly need. Call immediately." Vanessa's message completed the narrative. "Alex, how could you? Mom's been crying nonstop and Dad's beside himself. They were trying to help you. Dr. Simmons is highly respected, and the intervention was planned with love. Instead, you humiliated everyone with police. This isn't you. It's like we don't even know who you've become." The coordinated message was clear. My refusal to comply with their demands was being framed as evidence of mental instability rather than legitimate self-advocacy. The realization reinforced my decision to maintain firm boundaries despite the emotional cost. After work, I met with Marcus to review the legal documentation he had prepared. The cease and desist letter outlined in clear, unemotional language the pattern of boundary violations and property intrusions, culminating in the unauthorized lock change and attempted occupation of my home. "This serves multiple purposes," Marcus explained as I reviewed the document. "It creates a formal record of these incidents, establishes clear consequences for further violations, and demonstrates your consistent, rational approach to addressing the situation, countering any narrative about impaired judgment." "And the restraining order?" I asked, the word still difficult to voice. "It's prepared but not filed," he clarified. Given their escalating tactics, especially bringing in someone presenting himself as a mental health professional to potentially support claims about your psychological state, having it ready is prudent. We can file immediately if necessary. I signed the cease and desist letter, watching as Marcus's assistant prepared it for certified delivery. The formal legal language transformed my personal boundary violations into documented offenses, a validation of the seriousness of what I had experienced. "What happens next depends largely on how they respond," Marcus advised. "Best case, this formal notice provides the reality check they need to respect your boundaries. Worst case, we may need additional legal measures." "And if they attempt to pursue their claims about my mental health?" The documentation we've assembled, including the professional assessment from Dr. Shaw and the police report noting their unauthorized entry, establishes a clear counter-narrative. Additionally, their pattern of escalation specifically related to property disputes rather than genuine health concerns undermines their credibility. His reasoned analysis provided some comfort, but as I drove home that evening, emotional weight settled heavily. Despite their manipulative tactics, these were still my parents. The childhood instinct to seek their approval and avoid their disappointment remained powerful, even as my adult self recognized the necessity of standing firm. The security company technicians were completing their installation when I arrived home. The system they had implemented was comprehensive: door and window sensors, motion-activated cameras covering all entrances, and an application that would allow me to monitor activity remotely. The cost was substantial, but the peace of mind it offered seemed worth every penny. "Systems activated," the lead technician explained, walking me through the control panel and mobile application. "Any unauthorized entry attempts will trigger immediate alerts to both your phone and our monitoring center. We can dispatch security personnel if needed, and all footage is stored securely for potential evidence." The clinical language of unauthorized entry and potential evidence highlighted how far the situation had deteriorated. My family relationships now managed through security systems and legal documentation rather than trust and mutual respect. As the technicians departed, leaving me alone in my secured home, the emotional reality of recent events finally caught up with me. I moved through rooms that still held subtle traces of my parents' occupation: a rearranged bookshelf, kitchen, cabinets organized to my mother's preferences, the lingering scent of my father's aftershave in the guest bathroom. The physical reminders prompted tears I had been suppressing through days of strategic planning and professional composure. This grief, for family relationships now irrevocably changed, for the sense of safety within my family that might never fully return, demanded acknowledgement. I allowed myself the release of tears without self-judgment, recognizing that mourning these losses didn't undermine the necessity of my boundaries. The following morning brought notification that my parents had received the cease and desist letter. Their response came not through legal channels, but via a family-wide email chain that included extended relatives, family friends, and even my former in-laws. The message, authored by my father but clearly co-signed by my mother, was a masterclass in selective narrative. "With heavy hearts, we must share disturbing news regarding our daughter Alexandra." Despite our attempts to provide support during what we believed was a difficult period following her divorce, she has responded with increasingly concerning behavior, including changing locks to prevent family access, making unfounded accusations, and most distressingly, involving police in what should have been a private family matter. We've consulted with professionals who suggest these actions may indicate deeper psychological issues requiring intervention. Instead of accepting help, Alexandra has now sent legal threats through an attorney. While we respect her right to independence, we cannot stand by while she potentially harms herself through isolation and paranoia. We ask for your understanding and support as we navigate this painful situation. Our only goal remains Alexandra's well-being, despite her current inability to recognize our loving intentions. The public airing of private matters, carefully framed to position them as concerned parents and me as unstable, represented a new escalation. My phone immediately began buzzing with messages from relatives and acquaintances expressing concern and confusion. Rather than engaging directly with the email or the resulting flurry of concerned outreach, I contacted Marcus for guidance on addressing this new tactic. "This is unfortunately common in family disputes," he noted after reviewing the email. "It's an attempt to control the narrative and potentially isolate you by turning your support network against you. The good news is that this kind of publicly distributed character assassination actually strengthens our position if further legal action becomes necessary." "How should I respond?" I asked, torn between defending myself and maintaining dignified silence. "A brief, factual response that redirects to the core issue without emotional engagement would be most effective. I can draft something if you'd like, or guide you through composing your own reply." With Marcus's assistance, I crafted a measured response to the group thread. I'm aware of the email regarding my personal situation and appreciate genuine concern from those who have reached out. To clarify, recent events stem from my parents' repeated attempts to pressure me into relinquishing my home to my sister, including taking my keys without permission and changing my locks without consent after I had asked them to leave. The police involvement referenced occurred when my parents entered my house without permission after I had changed the locks for security reasons. These are documented facts, not matters of perception or interpretation. I remain committed to healthy, respectful relationships with my family based on mutual boundaries and respect for autonomy. I will not be discussing this private matter further in public forums and ask for understanding as I focus on moving forward positively. The reply generated immediate private messages from several family members expressing surprise at the full context and offering support. Most notably, my cousin Elise, always the family truth-teller, called to share her perspective. I knew something wasn't right about that email, she said when I answered. Robert and Eleanor have always had a different dynamic with you compared to Vanessa. This isn't the first time they've positioned you as difficult when you didn't immediately accommodate their preferences. Her validation, the first from within the family, provided unexpected comfort. It feels like I'm fighting not just for my house, but for my right to make my own choices without being labeled unstable. Because you are, Elise confirmed. This pattern has existed since we were kids. Remember when you wanted to study journalism instead of pre-law and Aunt Eleanor told everyone you were going through a phase of rebellion? Or when you chose a smaller wedding instead of the elaborate event they wanted, and Uncle Robert suggested to everyone it indicated commitment issues? This is just a more extreme version of their usual approach to controlling your choices. Our conversation provided valuable perspective. This wasn't a sudden personality change on my parents' part, but rather an escalation of long-established patterns I had normalized throughout my life. The realization was both troubling and empowering, highlighting how necessary my current boundaries had become. The following weeks established a new normal. My parents maintained distance, communicating only through occasional formal emails that continued to express concern while respecting the legal boundaries established. Vanessa attempted more direct pressure through frequent calls and visits to my office, each time bearing some new argument for why transferring my house to her family was the rational, compassionate choice. The kids ask about Aunt Alex's big house with the window seat all the time, she mentioned during one unexpected lunch visit. They don't understand why family can't share with family. Boundaries aren't about not sharing, I explained, maintaining professional composure despite the public setting. They're about respecting others' right to choose how and when they share. I'm happy to have the children visit when invited, but my home remains my home. These encounters tested my resolve but also strengthened it. Each successful boundary maintenance building confidence in my right to self-determination. At work, my new executive role provided welcome focus and affirmation as I implemented innovative publishing strategies that were already showing positive results. 6 weeks after the police incident, I received an unexpected message from Dr. Simmons, the family counselor who had accompanied my parents during their attempted reoccupation of my home. His email arrived on my professional account, carefully worded but clear in its purpose. Ms. Richards, I'm writing to offer a formal apology regarding my involvement in the situation at your residence last month. While I was approached by your parents with what appeared to be genuine concerns about your well-being, I now recognize that I failed to seek your perspective or consent before participating in what was characterized to me as a family intervention. After reflecting on the events and reviewing professional ethical standards, I acknowledge that my participation, however well-intentioned, was inappropriate and potentially harmful. I've communicated to your parents that I cannot provide further services related to your situation without your direct involvement and consent, which I respect is unlikely given the circumstances. This message is not intended to intrude further, but but rather to acknowledge my professional misstep and extend an apology. The unexpected accountability provided a strange sense of validation. Here was an admission from someone my parents had enlisted to support their narrative that their approach had been fundamentally flawed. I forwarded the message to Marcus, who confirmed its value as documentation of the inappropriate tactics employed. "This is significant," he noted. "A professional acknowledging ethical concerns about the approach your parents presented as legitimate medical intervention. It further undermines any claims about acting solely from health concerns." The apology also prompted personal reflection on the broader impact of establishing firm boundaries. By refusing to yield despite intense pressure, I had not only protected my property rights, but potentially prevented my parents from involving others in their inappropriate tactics. 2 months after the police intervention, my home security system alerted me to activity at my front door while I was at work. The camera footage showed my mother standing alone on my porch, no car visible in the driveway, suggesting she had perhaps walked from a nearby location. She appeared hesitant, raising her hand to knock before lowering it again, then finally leaving a small package before departing. When I returned home, I approached the package cautiously, an elegant silver gift bag with tissue paper, and opened it on my porch rather than bringing it inside. It contained a small wooden box I recognized immediately, my childhood jewelry box, hand-carved by my grandfather, containing the modest collection of family heirlooms traditionally passed to daughters. A note accompanied it, handwritten on my mother's monogrammed stationery. "Alexandra, these belong to you regardless of our current differences. Your grandmother would have wanted you to have them now, as was always intended. I recognize that trust has been damaged, perhaps irreparably. While I still believe we acted from love and concern, I acknowledge the pain our actions have caused. The items in this box represent your place in our family history, which remains unchanged despite current circumstances. Mom." The gesture, returning family heirlooms that acknowledged my legitimate place in the family lineage regardless of current conflict, represented the first crack in the unified front my parents had maintained throughout the dispute. The note, while stopping short of a true apology, acknowledged harm caused rather than solely positioning me as the problem. I brought the jewelry box inside, placing it on my bedroom dresser where my grandmother's modest pearl necklace and my great-grandmother's wedding band would be visible daily, reminders of my connection to family history that existed independently of current relationships. The following week brought another unexpected development. My father, who had maintained complete silence since the legal notice was delivered, requested a meeting at his attorney's office, a neutral location where both of us could bring legal representation. Marcus accompanied me to the appointment, his presence providing both practical support and symbolic reinforcement that I would not engage without appropriate protection of my interests. My father arrived with his longtime colleague Harris Peterson, a family law specialist whose presence signaled the seriousness with which he was approaching this conversation. The office conference room created a formal atmosphere that removed the emotional dynamics of family spaces, allowing focus on practical matters. "Alexandra," my father began after introductions were complete, "I've requested this meeting to address the property dispute directly and propose a resolution that acknowledges your position while addressing family needs. The framing, recognizing a legitimate property dispute rather than characterizing my boundaries as evidence of mental instability, represented significant progress. I'm open to hearing your proposal," I replied, maintaining neutral professionalism. My father slid a document across the table. "This outlines a family trust structure that would preserve your ownership rights while creating a secured future interest for Vanessa's children. You would maintain exclusive residency rights for as long as you choose, with the property eventually transferring to your niece and nephew after your lifetime or upon any future decision to sell." Marcus reviewed the document carefully while I considered the implications. The proposal effectively acknowledged my absolute right to the property during my lifetime while creating a structured inheritance plan that would eventually benefit Vanessa's children. This appears to recognize Ms. Richards's full ownership and control, Marcus noted, while establishing a potential future benefit for family members she cares about. However, it would limit her future options regarding the property. I would need time to consider this, I said, recognizing the proposal represented a significant shift from previous demands while still seeking to influence the ultimate disposition of my home. Of course, my father replied, his tone remaining professionally detached. We're not seeking an immediate decision. The document represents an attempt to find middle ground that respects your current position while addressing longer-term family considerations. As the meeting concluded, my father hesitated before speaking again. Alexandra, regardless of the outcome regarding this proposal, I want to acknowledge that our approach to this situation was flawed. While our concerns were genuine, our methods were inappropriate. For that, I apologize. The words, clearly carefully chosen and limited in scope, nonetheless represented a significant concession from a man who rarely acknowledged error. His apology addressed methods rather than underlying intentions, but even this partial accountability marked evolution in our dynamic. Thank you for acknowledging that, I replied, maintaining my composure. I'll consider the proposal and respond. After careful review. In the weeks that followed, I evaluated the trust proposal with Marcus's guidance, ultimately deciding that while I appreciated the recognition of my ownership rights, I wasn't ready to make binding commitments about the future disposition of my property. Instead, I counterproposed a formal agreement that firmly established my sole ownership and control while expressing my intention, but not legal obligation, to consider family needs in future estate planning. This counterproposal was accepted, with minimal negotiation, creating a documented resolution that protected my autonomy while acknowledging family relationships that, while damaged, remained important to me. Gradually, carefully controlled contact resumed with my parents. Our interactions remained primarily formal and often included trusted third parties, family gatherings rather than private meetings, public restaurants rather than homes, conversations, focused on neutral topics rather than rehashing past conflicts. Vanessa maintained greater distance, her disappointment about the house creating a barrier she seemed unwilling to bridge, despite my attempts to separate our sibling relationship from the property dispute. Her children, however, were welcomed into my home for occasional visits, their delight in the window seat and backyard garden providing moments of genuine connection amid the complicated adult dynamics. 6 months after the confrontation that had brought police to my doorstep, I hosted a small dinner party for colleagues celebrating Meridian Publishing's most successful quarter in 5 years. Success largely attributed to the innovative digital strategies I had implemented as executive editor. The gathering filled my home with laughter, professional camaraderie, and the warm buzz of shared accomplishment. As I moved among my guests, refilling wine glasses and engaging in conversations about future publishing projects, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the window, confident, engaged, at ease in my own space. The woman in that reflection had traversed a difficult journey from accommodation to assertion, from seeking approval to standing firm in her own truth. The house around me, the physical space I had fought to protect, had transformed from being merely a possession into a symbol of something far more valuable. The right to define my own boundaries, make my own choices, and create a life aligned with my authentic values rather than others' expectations. Later that evening, after my guests had departed and I sat alone in my peaceful living room, I reflected on the true inheritance I had claimed through this conflict. Not just property rights, but the profound self-ownership that comes from honoring your own worth even when those closest to you question it. That inner authority, once established, could never be taken away, regardless of what physical assets might come and go throughout life. The journey had been painful, The relationships altered permanently, but the woman who had emerged, capable of compassion without capitulation, connection without compliance, was infinitely stronger than the one who had first answered her mother's unexpected phone call months before. In reclaiming my home, I had ultimately reclaimed myself, the most valuable possession of all. The one-year anniversary of my promotion to executive editor arrived alongside spring, bringing vibrant renewal to both my professional landscape and personal life. Meridian Publishing had thrived under my leadership of the lifestyle division, with 3 titles reaching bestseller status and a successful digital platform launch that had exceeded revenue projections by 30%. My team had expanded to include 2 additional editors and a dedicated digital content strategist, all working cohesively to advance our publishing vision. My home, once the battlefield of family conflict, had gradually transformed back into my sanctuary. I had reclaimed each space deliberately, repainting the guest room in a soothing sage green to erase memories of tension, redesigning my home office with ergonomic furniture that supported long creative sessions, and establishing a meditation corner in the sunroom where morning light created perfect conditions for reflection and centering. The relationship with my parents had settled into what Marcus called structured civility, interactions governed by clear boundaries and expectations, rather than the emotional manipulation that had characterized our previous dynamic. We maintained contact through occasional family gatherings and structured visits, always in public settings or with the protective presence of other family members. My father's demeanor had shifted subtly from confrontational to cautiously respectful, perhaps influenced by the professional consequences he had faced following the police incident. His law firm partners had expressed concern about his judgment after learning of the unauthorized property entry, prompting a level of self-reflection previously foreign to his confident personality. My mother's approach had evolved differently, moving from overt pressure to wistful references about family unity that stopped just short of guilt manipulation. She had begun therapy at my aunt's suggestion, a development that surprised everyone familiar with her lifelong dismissal of psychological support as unnecessary for people with proper self-discipline. Vanessa remained the most distant, our sibling relationship strained by her continued belief that family obligation should have superseded my property rights. Her occasional text messages maintained surface pleasantries while carefully avoiding any topics of substance. Her children, however, had become regular visitors to my home, our aunt-niece-nephew relationship flourishing independently of adult conflicts. This fragile new ecosystem of family relations required constant tending, but the boundaries that had once demanded exhausting vigilance had gradually become natural elements of my interaction patterns. I no longer questioned my right to maintain these parameters or felt obligated to justify my choices, progress that my therapist Dr. Brenner considered significant. Guilt-free boundary maintenance represents substantial emotional growth, she had noted during our monthly session. The ability to honor your limits without internal conflict demonstrates integration of self-advocacy as a core value rather than a defensive response. Her observation captured precisely how I'd evolved, from reactively protecting my territory to proactively designing a life aligned with my authentic needs and values. This evolution extended beyond family dynamics into all areas of my life, informing my leadership style, friendships, and approach to potential romantic relationships after the extended dating hiatus that had followed my divorce. On a particularly beautiful April morning, I was enjoying coffee on my back deck when my phone displayed an incoming call from Diane, my closest friend, who had provided unwavering support throughout the family conflict, but had recently relocated to Chicago for a museum curator position. "Morning, stranger," I answered warmly. "How's the Windy City treating you?" "Cold one day, sweltering the next. Typical spring chaos," she replied. "But that's not why I'm calling. Are you sitting down? You might want to be." "Already am. What's happening?" "I just got off the phone with Elise," she said, referring to my truth-telling cousin. "Vanessa's putting her house on the market next week. They're moving to Denver." The news stunned me momentarily. Vanessa and Tom had built their entire professional lives in our city, her surgical practice, his hospital administration position. Denver? That's completely unexpected. What prompted this? Apparently, Tom received an offer to head a new pediatric care initiative at Colorado Children's Hospital. Substantial salary increase, prestigious position. And Vanessa has arranged a partnership with a surgical group there. They've been planning this quietly for months. Months? I repeated, processing the implications. And they never mentioned it during all the conflict over my house? That's the part that made me call immediately, Diane continued. According to Elise, they've known about this possibility since last summer, before your parents even came to stay with you. The preliminary discussions started well before the whole nightmare with your parents trying to pressure you out of your home. The timeline landed like a physical blow. The entire painful confrontation about my house, the manipulation, the boundary violations, the attempted character assassination, had occurred while Vanessa and Tom were actively planning to relocate across the country, so their desperate need for my house was a convenient narrative, Diane finished. Maybe they thought your house could be an investment property or temporary residence until their move finalized. Or maybe your parents seized on their space complaints as justification for what they wanted to do anyway. Either way, the Vanessa needs your house for her family crisis was manufactured. I sat in stunned silence, absorbing this revelation. The conflict that had consumed months of my life, strained family relationships, and required legal intervention had been based on a fundamentally dishonest premise. My parents had pressured me to surrender my home for Vanessa's family while knowing, or deliberately avoiding knowing, that they planned to leave the state entirely. I'm sorry to drop this on you, Diane said, breaking the silence, but I thought you should hear it before the official announcement starts circulating. No, I appreciate knowing, I assured her, gathering my thoughts. It's just clarifying, in a way I wasn't expecting. After ending the call, I remained on my deck, watching spring birds dart between newly leafed branches as I processed this information. The revelation should have triggered anger, justified outrage at the unnecessary conflict based on false pretenses. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm clarity, as if the final piece of a complex puzzle had clicked into place, completing my understanding of what had truly driven the family dynamic. The house had never been the actual issue. It had been a convenient battleground for more fundamental conflicts about autonomy, favoritism, and control patterns established throughout my childhood and carried into adult relationships. My refusal to yield on this particular issue had simply forced these long-standing dynamics into the open, where they could no longer be denied or normalized. Rather than immediately confronting my family with this new information, I chose to consult with Dr. Brenner in an emergency session that afternoon. This revelation clearly represents significant new context for understanding the conflict, she acknowledged after I'd explained the situation. How are you planning to address it with your family? That's why I'm here, I admitted. My initial instinct is confrontation, demanding explanations for why they pursued this conflict so aggressively knowing Vanessa's plans. But I'm not sure that would be productive. What outcome would serve your well-being best at this point? She asked, redirecting my focus from reaction to intention. The question prompted careful reflection. I don't need vindication. The legal and practical matters were resolved months ago. What I want is honest acknowledgement of the patterns that led to this situation, so they don't continue affecting our relationships moving forward. That's a thoughtful objective, she affirmed. Consider that direct confrontation about the Denver plans might trigger defensiveness that would prevent the deeper acknowledgement you're seeking. A more indirect approach might create space for reflection rather than reaction. Her guidance helped formulate a strategy that prioritized genuine resolution over momentary satisfaction. Instead of immediately calling out the deception, I would create an opportunity for authentic conversation about our family patterns, using this situation as one example rather than the central focus. The following weekend offered a natural opportunity when my parents had scheduled their monthly dinner with me at a neutral restaurant venue, our established practice for rebuilding controlled contact. I arrived early, securing a quiet corner table that would allow for relatively private conversation. Despite the public setting, my mother arrived first, her appearance reflecting the subtle changes of recent months, her typically perfect styling slightly softened, her expression less rigidly controlled. My father joined moments later, his customary commanding presence, tempered by a new cautiousness in his interactions with me. After initial pleasantries and ordering, I steered the conversation toward a topic I'd deliberately avoided previously. "I've been reflecting on patterns in our family dynamics," I began, carefully, specifically how certain roles became established over time. Vanessa as the favored achiever, me as the practical problem solver expected to accommodate others' needs. "I'm curious about your perspective on how those patterns developed." My mother's surprise at this direct approach was evident in her momentary frozen expression before she recovered. "I don't think we ever intentionally created such roles, Alexandra. We've always been proud of both our daughters' accomplishments. Different accomplishments, valued differently," I clarified without accusation. "I'm not raising this to assign blame, but to understand patterns that have shaped our relationships. Patterns that became very apparent during the conflict over my house." My father studied me with the analytical assessment he typically reserved for complex legal situations. What specifically prompted this line of thinking now? The question offered a natural opening. "I recently learned about Vanessa and Tom's move to Denver," I said, watching their expressions carefully. "It appears they've been planning this career change for many months, including during the period when you were pressuring me to surrender my house for their family's needs." The impact was immediate and telling. My mother's hand froze midway to her water glass. My father's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Neither immediately denied knowledge of the plans, their silence confirming what I had suspected. "We were aware they were exploring opportunities," my father finally acknowledged, selecting his words with attorney precision, "but nothing was certain during the situation with your house." Yet the urgency and pressure regarding my property was presented as absolute, I noted. The narrative that Vanessa desperately needed my space for her growing family was central to every conversation, despite their active plans to relocate. My mother interjected, her tone defensive but lacking its former authority. Vanessa's space constraints were real, regardless of potential future changes. We were trying to address immediate family needs. By demanding I surrender my home based on incomplete information, I completed the thought. This isn't about Vanessa's move specifically. It's about a pattern where my needs and choices are considered secondary to others in our family system, where I'm expected to yield rather than being supported in my own path. The observation hung between us, challenging decades of established family mythology. My father, ever the strategist, appeared to recognize that standard deflection tactics would no longer be effective. There may be some validity to that perspective, he conceded, the acknowledgement clearly difficult for him. Our approach to parenting each of you developed based on your different personalities. Vanessa required more active direction and validation. You seemed naturally self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency that was then taken for granted, I added. Expected rather than appreciated. My mother's expression reflected genuine confusion. We've always admired your independence, Alexandra. Your ability to handle challenges without the emotional support Vanessa needed. There's a difference between not needing emotional handholding and not deserving basic respect for my choices, I explained. The conflict over my house exemplified this pattern. My legitimate boundaries were pathologized as irrational attachment, simply because they didn't align with what you wanted. The conversation progressed into territory we had never navigated before. Honest examination of family dynamics without the protective layers of denial and rationalization that had previously characterized our interactions. While neither parent offered complete acknowledgement or apology, their willingness to engage rather than dismiss represented meaningful progress. Near the end of our dinner, my father addressed the Denver situation directly. Regarding Vanessa's move, you're correct that we should have been more transparent about their plans during discussions about your house. The situations were connected, but in ways we didn't fully acknowledge even to ourselves. This admission, partial but significant, opened a pathway to more authentic relationship that acknowledged our history without being solely defined by it. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my mother hesitated before speaking. We may not always understand your choices, Alexandra, but recent events have made clear that we need to respect them regardless. Your home is your sanctuary, something I should have recognized sooner, having created my own over decades of marriage. The comment revealed a flash of genuine empathy, recognition of my needs through the lens of her own experience rather than judgment based on comparison to Vanessa's different priorities. This small bridge across our differences felt more valuable than any grand apology. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa's relocation plans became public knowledge, generating expected congratulations and surprise throughout family and professional circles. Our direct communication remained minimal, but I sent a thoughtful email acknowledging her career opportunity and wishing her family well in their transition, a gesture of goodwill without pretense of resolved conflict. Her response arrived days later, brief but less defensive than our previous exchanges. Thank you for your kind wishes. This opportunity emerged unexpectedly last summer, but has evolved into something we couldn't refuse. I recognize the timing. Creates complicated questions regarding previous family discussions. Perhaps distance will provide perspective for everyone. The children would like to visit your house once more before we leave. They're particularly attached to the window seat reading nook you created for them. The acknowledgement, while carefully worded to avoid direct responsibility, represented a small step toward honesty. I arranged a final visit for my niece and nephew, creating special memories in the space they had enjoyed while maintaining clear boundaries with Vanessa during the abbreviated encounter. As their moving day approached, I received an unexpected call from Tom, my brother-in-law who had remained largely peripheral during the family conflict, his discomfort with the situation evident, but his direct involvement minimal. Alexandra. He began awkwardly after basic greetings. I wanted to speak with you privately before we leave, about the house situation and everything that happened. I appreciate that, Tom. What's on your mind? His sigh carried months of unspoken tension. I need to apologize for my role in what happened. The truth is, I never wanted your house. The commute would have been terrible for my hospital schedule, and the renovation costs to accommodate our needs would have been substantial. Then why did you participate in the pressure campaign? I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Family dynamics, he admitted. When Vanessa and your parents united around an idea, opposing it directly wasn't feasible. I expressed concerns privately but didn't take a firm enough stand. By the time things escalated to police involvement, we were already in serious discussions about the Denver position, making the whole conflict seem increasingly absurd. His candor offered validation I hadn't realized I still needed. Confirmation from an insider that the situation had indeed been as irrational as it had seemed from my perspective. The Colorado opportunity is genuinely exciting, he continued. Vanessa will have a more manageable surgical schedule, the children will have excellent schools, and the quality of life seems promising. I wish the transition hadn't been complicated by unnecessary family conflict. So do I agreed. But perhaps something constructive emerged from it nonetheless. Family patterns that had gone unacknowledged for decades are finally being recognized, which creates possibility for healthier relationships moving forward. After ending the call, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me despite the legal resolution months earlier. Tom's acknowledgement provided external validation of my experience, confirmation that standing firm in my boundaries had been appropriate despite the intense pressure to yield. The day of Vanessa's family departure arrived with early summer heat. They had planned a cross-country drive, turning the relocation into a family adventure before settling into their new Colorado home. I had not expected to participate in their send-off, but a text from my mother the evening before extended a careful invitation. Vanessa's family leaves tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Small gathering at their house beforehand. Your presence would mean a great deal, but we understand if you prefer distance given recent history. The invitation, acknowledging my potential discomfort rather than assuming my participation, demonstrated my mother's evolving understanding of boundaries. After careful consideration, I decided to attend briefly, maintaining my commitment to civility without pretending conflicts had been fully resolved. The gathering was appropriately subdued, extended family offering practical help with last-minute packing while providing emotional support for the significant transition. I arrived with carefully chosen gifts for my niece and nephew, custom travel journals with maps highlighting interesting landmarks along their route to Denver, encouraging their sense of adventure while acknowledging the emotional complexity of leaving their childhood home. Vanessa's greeting was cautious but not cold. Thank you for coming, and for the children's gifts. They're perfect. I wanted them to have something special for the journey, I explained. Major transitions should be marked meaningfully, especially for children. We navigated careful conversation about practical aspects of their move, the Colorado housing market, the children's new school, the professional opportunities awaiting both her and Tom. Beneath the surface pleasantries lay unresolved tension, but also the beginning of mutual recognition that our different paths could exist without requiring either's invalidation. As their departure time approached, my father sought me out privately, guiding me to a quiet corner of the yard away from the general activity. "Alexandra?" he began, uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. "There's something I need to say before they leave." His formal tone triggered momentary concern. "What is it?" "I've been reflecting on recent events, the conflict over your house, how quickly it escalated, the methods we employed." He paused, seemingly organizing thoughts. Prepared in advance, my legal training emphasized zealous advocacy for clients' interests, identifying leverage points and pursuing advantage aggressively. I realize I've applied those same adversarial tactics within our family, particularly regarding you. The self-awareness surprised me, as did his willingness to articulate it directly. "That's an insightful observation. It was ineffective and inappropriate," he continued. "More importantly, it damaged our relationship in ways that legal training never addressed. The cost of winning at the expense of mutual respect and trust." This acknowledgement, specific to his actions rather than generalized about family dynamics, represented a significant evolution from our restaurant conversation weeks earlier. "What prompted this reflection?" I asked, genuinely curious about his internal process. "Ironically, professional consequences," he admitted. "Two of my partners expressed serious concerns about my judgment following the police incident at your house. Their criticism forced me to examine the situation from outside my own perspective, to recognize how my behavior would appear to objective observers guided by professional ethics rather than family emotion. The external validation had apparently achieved what my direct boundaries could not, creating sufficient discomfort to prompt genuine self-reflection. His ability to acknowledge this demonstrated unexpected growth. "I appreciate your sharing that insight," I said. "It helps me understand some of what drove the escalation." He nodded, seemingly grateful for the measured response rather than rejection. "Vanessa's departure creates natural transition for all of us," I hope it might. Allow relationships to evolve based on who we are now rather than established patterns from the past. As my sister's family finally departed, car packed beyond reasonable capacity, children waving excitedly from back windows, extended family offering final hugs and well wishes, I observed the scene with complex emotions. The physical distance their move created might indeed offer opportunity for relationship reset, free from the immediate pressures and expectations that had characterized our local interactions. In the weeks following their departure, I continued the careful work of rebuilding my life according to my own design, rather than external expectations. The professional success at Meridian Publishing provided creative fulfillment and leadership, opportunities that aligned perfectly with my natural strengths. My home continued evolving as an expression of my authentic self, renovation projects reflecting my preferences rather than compromise or accommodation. Most significantly, I began cautiously entering the dating world again after the extended hiatus following my divorce. The experience felt markedly different from previous relationships. I engaged from a position of self-knowledge and established boundaries, rather than seeking external validation or compromising core needs for connection. Jonathan, a landscape architect I met through a mutual friend's dinner gathering, appreciated rather than challenged these boundaries, recognizing them as elements of healthy self-respect rather than obstacles to overcome. Our relationship developed slowly, thoughtfully, each step forward reflecting mutual choice rather than expectation or obligation. When he eventually visited my home for the first time, months into our dating relationship, his response validated my fierce protection of this space that had become so symbolic of my autonomy. "This place perfectly reflects you," he observed, noting the harmonious blend of creative workspace, comfortable living areas, and carefully curated personal elements. "I can see why you fought so hard to preserve it as your own." "It represents more than just property," I explained, sharing select details of the family conflict without dwelling on painful specifics. It became a boundary line for my right to self-determination, to make choices based on my authentic needs rather than others' expectations. "That boundary sounds hard-won and worth maintaining," he replied with genuine understanding. "Sacred, ground that deserves respect." His perception, recognizing the deeper significance without requiring exhaustive explanation, reinforced my growing certainty that healthy relationships enhance rather than diminish individual autonomy. 1 year and 3 months after the police confrontation at my doorstep, I hosted a housewarming party, not for a new residence, but for my newly renovated home that had been completely transformed from the space my parents had attempted to claim. Every room reflected deliberate choices that honored my preferences, each renovation element carefully selected to create environments supporting my well-being and creative expression. The guest list included colleagues, friends, and select family members who had demonstrated respect for my boundaries throughout the conflict, or had shown growth in their understanding of healthy relationship dynamics. My parents attended briefly, their participation appropriately reserved but genuinely supportive, a marked evolution from previous interactions. As evening progressed and conversations flowed through rooms once filled with tension, Diane pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the deck overlooking the garden I had redesigned with native plants and sustainable features. "Look at what you've created here," she observed, gesturing to both the physical space and the gathering of people who genuinely supported my authentic self. "Not just a beautiful home, but a life aligned with your actual values rather than inherited expectations." Her observation captured precisely what the painful family conflict had ultimately produced: not just preserved property rights, but profound personal transformation. By standing firm when my boundaries were violated, I had discovered a core, strength previously untested, establishing a foundation for relationships based on mutual respect rather than accommodation or compliance. The house that had become a battleground had transformed into something far more valuable: physical manifestation of my right to self-determination. Each room represented not just aesthetic choices, but philosophical ones, deliberate decisions, to honor my authentic needs and preferences rather than sacrificing them for others' approval or comfort. As guests departed later that evening, leaving me alone in my peaceful home, I moved through spaces now completely reclaimed and reinvented. The guest room that had housed my parents during their occupation had been transformed into a creative studio for writing and art projects. The kitchen reflected my cooking preferences rather than my mother's reorganization. The living areas featured comfortable furnishings arranged for conversation and connection rather than formal presentation. Standing in my bedroom, the space that had served as sanctuary during the most difficult periods of family conflict, I noticed how completely the energy had shifted from defensive retreat to peaceful restoration. The room now featured calming colors, natural materials, and carefully selected artwork that nourished creativity and self-connection. The journey from conflict to reclamation had been painful, but ultimately transformative. Not just preserving my property rights, but fundamentally reshaping my understanding of healthy boundaries, authentic self-advocacy, and relationships that honor rather than diminish individual autonomy. The house remained mine, legally, emotionally, and symbolically, but its significance had evolved beyond mere possession. It had become the physical manifestation of a profound truth discovered through conflict, that standing firm in your authentic needs is not selfishness but essential self-respect, and that relationships worthy of nurturing are those that enhance rather than diminish individual wholeness. This hard-won wisdom would guide not just family interactions, but all relationships moving forward. A foundation built through difficulty, but designed for sustainable strength and authentic connection. The painful process of reclaiming my house had ultimately given me something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that I could trust myself to protect what mattered most, even against the most powerful emotional pressure to yield. 2 years after the confrontation that had fundamentally altered my family dynamics, life had settled into a rhythm of purposeful productivity and measured peace. Meridian Publishing had promoted me to Chief Content Officer following the unprecedented success of our lifestyle division, giving me oversight of multiple imprints and development of our expanding digital platforms. My renovated home had become not just a personal sanctuary, but occasionally a gathering space for creative collaborations and publishing events that blended my professional and personal worlds seamlessly. My relationship with Jonathan had deepened into a partnership based on mutual respect and authentic connection. Unlike my marriage to Daniel, which had been built partly on meeting external expectations of success and compatibility, this relationship honored our individual autonomy while creating shared experiences that enhanced rather than diminished our separate identities. Family relationships had stabilized into what Dr. Brenner described as functional distance, regular but limited contact governed by clear boundaries and expectations. My parents maintained their modified behavior, demonstrating continued imperfect growth in respecting my autonomy. Occasional video calls with Vanessa's family in Denver provided connection with my niece and nephew, while maintaining appropriate separation from the unresolved tensions with my sister. This carefully constructed equilibrium was disrupted by an unexpected development on a crisp October morning when my father called, our scheduled monthly communication occurring 2 weeks earlier than planned. "Alexandra," his tone carried unusual tension. "I need to discuss something important. Are you available to meet this afternoon?" The request, breaking our established pattern of advance planning for in-person meetings, immediately triggered concern. "Is everything all right? Are you and Mom okay?" "We're physically fine," he replied, his careful wording notable. "But there's a situation developing that affects the family, including you. I'd prefer to discuss it in person rather than over the phone." My mind immediately cataloged possibilities: health issues they were reluctant to discuss by phone, financial problems requiring family support, perhaps relationship difficulties between them. Whatever the situation, his uncharacteristic urgency suggested significance beyond ordinary family matters. I have meetings until 4, I said, consulting my calendar. I could meet you at Riverside Cafe around 4:30? That would be appreciated, he confirmed. I'll see you then. The Pao. Remainder of my workday passed with productive focus despite the background hum of curiosity about my father's unusual request. Years of professional discipline had enhanced my ability to compartmentalize, addressing immediate responsibilities while maintaining awareness of pending concerns without allowing them to dominate my attention. Riverside Cafe offered an ideal meeting location, public enough to maintain the boundary of neutral territory while providing sufficient privacy for sensitive conversation in its garden seating area. I arrived a few minutes early, securing a corner table partially screened by ornamental grasses and flowering shrubs. My father arrived precisely on time, his appearance notably different from our recent encounters. Though still meticulously groomed, he carried himself with less of the commanding presence that had defined him throughout my life. Subtle signs of strain showed in the tightness around his eyes and the slight forward hunch of his shoulders. "Thank you for making time. On short notice," he began after ordering black coffee. "I know this deviates from our established communication patterns." "Of course," I replied, studying him with growing concern. "What's happening, Dad?" He took a measured breath before responding. "I've been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease." The statement, delivered with the same direct precision he had used throughout his legal career, momentarily suspended my thoughts. While not immediately life-threatening, Parkinson's represented a progressive condition that would inevitably affect his independence and potentially his cognitive function over time. "When did you learn this?" I asked, processing the implications. "The definitive diagnosis came yesterday, though I've been undergoing evaluations for several months following some concerning symptoms." He detailed the mild tremor in his left hand that had initially prompted medical consultation, followed by increasing stiffness and subtle balance issues that confirmed neurological involvement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.